Welcome to the Tracking Connections podcast, and thanks for listening.
We feature voices from around the world, sharing stories of working intentionally with deep nature connection in ways that transform lives, families, projects, and communities. I'm Ciara.
I'm Aidan.
And I'm John.
And we are your hosts from Living Connection First. Hello, everybody. This is Aidan, and I'm here with John and with Ciara Hincksman, who is the founder of Forest School Ireland, founded in 2009. And in 2008, she lived off-grid in County Kerry for 3 months, immersed in bushcraft, nature awareness, and sustainable living practices. She went to the first Art of Mentoring camp in the UK, based on the work of John Young and 8 Shields Institute. Subsequently, she traveled extensively in the UK and USA, meeting and learning from nature connection mentors, powerful youths, and elders. Truly inspired by these people, Ciara wanted to be part of bringing connection to nature, to self, and to others back home. Her passion is facilitating place-based, learner-centered development through story, wildlife, plants, crafts, and play, while also following the natural cycles of our seasons and our lives. So welcome, Ciara. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thanks, Aidan. Lovely to meet you both.
John, I wonder if I can pass it to you, and you may want to kick us off here.
Sure thing. So in case you're wondering, Aidan and I are father and son, and you can guess who's who. But, you know, I really think a lot about when Wolfgang Pehm from Germany said to me one day, he said, "John, I want to give you some really good news." And I said, "What's that, Wolfgang?" He said, "You're seeing through Native Eyes audio. I've translated into Polish with the help of some people from Poland that I've been teaching tracking to. So you'll be happy to know that your ancestors are nourishing from this." You know, and I had this sense within my being that just brought tears really to my eyes, right? And thinking about my grandmother, Cecilia McCormick, whose grandmother emigrated from Ireland during the potato famine, she was such an important force in my life growing up as a child. And her ways with the children and her ways of mischievously connecting us and sending us out on errands and catching our stories when we get back and getting us into the music and storytelling and all these sorts of things, you know, was, I think, probably the reason when I met Tom Brown on a street corner in 1971 that he gave me the time of day. Because my grandmother had been exercising my desire to go on errands in nature, bring back things to her, whether they were things to make pies or fish to make dinner or frogs to just put in a terrarium. She was the one who lit my fire and built those muscles in me, because the thing that Tom really needed from the person he was supposed to mentor was passion to go and learn this on my own, right? So I really think, you know, my Irish heritage has so much to do with why I'm sitting here right now. You know, and even when we were finding a name for Aidan, we chose an Irish name. And Ciara, tell us, what does Aidan mean? Do you know?
Aidan, I know the Irish is Aidan.
What I got from a silly book, right, which could be wrong, which is why I'm asking you, was that Aidan was the fire.
Little fire.
Yes. And the heart of the people, right? And it just meant so much to me to be able to give him that name, right? I just felt so connected. So I'm just expressing gratitude for what you're doing, because it's an answer to my own prayers in a sense, right? I really want to help my ancestors and the lands of my ancestors anytime I can. And I've worked in, you know, the UK and England a bunch, right? That's part of my heritage. Wolfgang thankfully brought some of it into Poland. And then I got to work with a little bit of my German ancestry, working in, you know, Germany, Austria, and that whole region. So yeah, it's just a pleasure to have you here. And tell us a little bit about, you know, how you got on this path. Because you didn't start there, did you?
No, I did not. I grew up in a family that was quite evocative of what you're saying, with a lot of play and a real sense of my parents were really able to get kids on their side because they just knew how to talk to them. And we were out playing a lot. So there was a lot of, you know, freedom to go exploring. Yeah, just a value around spending time out in nature from my folks. However, they didn't know what anything was called. We would have been, you know, beside an oak tree. They probably wouldn't have been able to tell what it was, but they just knew it was really good to be outside. So I tried to, you know, I went to college and I came out with a degree of some sort, and I started to work because that's what you do. And I kept trying new things, you know, because I knew I wasn't living my soul's work, and I probably wouldn't have even been audacious enough to imagine that that's really possible. I don't think I knew many people bar my parents, who loved being shop owners. They really loved, coming from the inner city the way they did. They really loved what they did, and they dedicated loads of their lives to it, and they did great. I didn't have that for working in admin in a corporate world. So I felt a bit sad about that. I was quite deflated, and I kept trying, and I had like two lives. I was doing things in the art world. I was, doing a bit of art therapy. I was doing a bit of community arts work, and I was doing some sports and stuff, but none of them were a job. So I eventually got a job. I was doing some conservation work as well. So I eventually got a job that was about bringing people outdoors, like an NGO for a sport. And I thought, great, I'm finally going to be able to pour all my value system and energy into something. And it was the most difficult part of my life I'd had up to that point. And it was a big part of, sort of broke me open in a good way. But at the time, it was really tough. I really struggled to have the humility to say, I can't do this job. You've hired the wrong person. And the dynamics in the office felt really tough. I couldn't find what leadership was. I didn't understand, like, what does a good leader look like? It was such a question I held. We talk a lot about leadership, but I don't think I've ever experienced it that made sense to me, other than my parents were naturally, their personalities were quite like that. They commanded respect just by being funny and kind and smart. But we were also very different, So I kind of had this, it all broke down. I had to leave the job. I was really stressed out. But before I quit, or before I was shown the door, I quit. There was, I saw that coming. So I helped a club join the organization. And as a thank you, I got invited to go down to County Kerry and spend the weekend with this dude who was from America. And he's like a big dude, and they don't know him, but he's just making the roof of his school. And he wanted to bring some bushcrafters down. And I went, yeah, grand, I'll do it, whatever it is. I just need to get out of Dublin and my headspace here. I was very sad. I was really, really stressed and upset. So I pootled down to Kerry, not knowing where I was going, no expectations. And I walked into this Cuilcha forest. So for people not from Ireland, Cuilcha is the Irish Forestry Service, but it's like a plantation system of Sitka spruce, which is non-native. And so there's lines of monoculture in bogland. So I walk into this really dark little woods, and there's a couple of people. One of them's up a tree. The other one is, bringing in hay bales for something to sit on. We're lighting the first fire, and this guy up the tree jumps down and goes, "Hey, I'm Greg." And it was Greg Sommer, who you have worked with for years, and Aidan knows well. What do you say about Greg?
Yeah, so 1994, when I went to teach in Duval, Washington, there was a meadow on a private home. That it was a retreat center, but that's where Paul and Sandy lived. And there was a teepee out in the field, right? It was sort of like I don't even know. It was just kind of, for me, it was sort of humorous. I'm like, okay, great. Here I am going to teach here in a field with a teepee. And there was this 12-year-old kid, I think, plus or minus, and apparently he'd read some Tom Brown books, and he was so ultra passionate. And someone had pulled me to the side and said, he's struggling with regular school and has this deep passion for nature and all that. Can you give him a little extra attention, was the request. And I just taught him a few things. And the next time I flew out there, he came up to me and he showed me all the things he had learned from that and told me the story. And I'm like, oh, interesting. He's a lot like I was. When Tom gave me something to do, off I went, right? And he just spent huge amounts of time out there practicing whatever someone would give him that would help him advance his passion, right? And then when I moved there in 1995, he joined up with the first programs. And then when we started the program that ended up being a kind of a forest school, if you will, it wasn't official. It was just like, well, let's just do all this stuff with the kids from the homeschooling community. And that's where Aidan actually joined in. And that was funny because when Aidan joined, there was another young boy named Aidan who was also in a neighboring community school who happened to be Aidan Spangler, the son of David Spangler. And it turns out when I talked to David later, we had both named our son after the same Aidan because I read it in the Magic of Findhorn in the acknowledgments. It was the one name that Aidan's mom and I didn't argue about. So it was such an interesting kind of coming together, right? Because he was born in 1983 and I'd read the Magic of Findhorn in those years. And we were looking in name books, but I pulled that out and looked in the forward and there was the name Aidan. And that was the one thing that Jane and I didn't argue over. So that's how he got his name. And later for him to become friends with Aidan and Johnny Spangler, it was just such an amazing kind of synchronicity. But Greg was maybe one of the youngest Kumana graduates, at 15. He went on to be trained. Well, he was at every art of mentoring and every kind of event, and he was always helping and volunteering, and eventually became staff. And, he was just a terrific, passionate young man, and went on to become a really skilled tracker. And he said, "Hey, do you think I should go to the tracker school, Tom Brown's school, my mentor's school?" And I said, "Not yet, Greg. I want you to keep pushing your tracking skills a little further. And when you hit that point, I'll say, now it's time to go." So when I sent him to the tracker school finally, or when I finally said, "Okay, you're good to go, Greg, go now," and he had already mastered so many aspects of tracking, sat in the front row, his eyes as big as saucers, and Tom immediately spotted him. And I said nothing to Tom about Greg. And I told Greg, "Don't tell Tom anything about your relationship with me. Let's just see what happens." Tom looked at him, had one conversation with him, and said, "You can come to any class you want for the rest of your life with me." Like, he adopted him immediately. He sensed something in him. So that's Greg. And then Greg has always been super interested in exploring his ancestral places, and I think that's what led him to Ireland. I remember when he went off, and just wonder, Aidan, if you have any reflections on Greg.
Greg was one of the people that introduced me to rock music. I remember hanging out with him in his room, and he was really into music. He was really into reading. He loved tracking and stuff like that. He also loved fantasy novels, and he had this bookshelf full of all these different thick books that he had read all the way through. It was an insight to me into the importance of flow learning, really, of having an actual interest in something, because he was struggling in school. And yet I kind of knew Greg to be one of the more intellectually mature kids at that age. Here we are, 12, 13 years old, and his reflections, and he's literally read, 150 books. He's read like 150,000 pages probably of books at this point at 13 years old. And he's plays 3 different instruments. He's doing all this stuff, so clearly it was good for him to find this world where he was in a culture of allowance and allowed to actually express himself, through his music interest, his nature interest, and his reading. And but yeah, we talked a lot about books, all different sorts of fantasy and science fiction stuff. And then he's the one that introduced me to electric instruments, really. I think that, playing his guitar and his electric bass may have been the first time that I played electric instruments. And then, little did I know that would become a significant part of 30 years of my life playing rock music. So, and Greg and I, we still keep in touch to this day. He's one of those people, and, I'm so grateful for those kind of people that you could not see each other for a decade and you sit down and it's like you're picking up right after the last sentence.
Oh, that's a beautiful story. I had no idea. See, I'm learning about my own son now. But the one thing I'll say about Greg is that he really took to, what we would call coyote teaching or coyote mentoring. Like, he got really good at it. And whenever I had younger people who needed an older role model who could take them on a journey, I'd always go to Greg, because he just had the most, he showed up just so humbly and so kind and so open. And he always had this massive curiosity. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, because it sounds like continuing where we left off.
Yeah, we got back there. So yeah, so this man is standing in front of me. He'd been in a tree, and just started to ask me questions about myself. And I don't know if you've met many Irish people, to the listeners out there, but we're not great listeners, but we're great talkers. So I was intrigued by someone who led conversation with loads of questions, and and there is humility in that, because if you're asking questions about something, you're admitting it's something you don't know. And it also really allows you to relax then into kind of go, well, actually, there's loads I don't know about either. And we started to ask each other lots of questions. And he was really interested in Ireland. And I think, when you talk, Aidan, about Greg reading a lot, like, he's someone who digests and thinks about the things he's read, and then he tells you about it later, and he's found a way to look at it that's really intriguing, and he picks out the bit that's really interesting to him. So yeah, it just really made me look at him and look at Abrick and Anna and think, these people are really alive. They're living some kind of alternative lifestyle I don't quite understand, but they seem really practical. What they're saying makes sense to me. And they're also showing a huge amount of curiosity about the country that they're in, the culture that they're in. And I'm learning things about even just the questions that I'm being asked. They're so good. So yeah, and he was the person who sent me out on my first sit spot. At some point during that weekend, he said, why don't you just go sit somewhere? I don't know, anywhere. I was like, anywhere. And I picked the side of the road, of this forestry road, and a bit of gravel, I think. And I came back from that kind of going, and he said, just write a few words and maybe draw a little picture about it. And in that process, I realized I'd walked past everything my whole life. I'd been working for an organization trying to connect people to nature who were walking past everything. And it's made me kind of slow down and notice the tiny things. And God, even just recognizing the tiny spider that was right beside my head, I didn't see, or the teeny tiny flowers, or these birds I didn't know the name of were flying around. All this life came in around me. It just did a huge amount to my deep psyche. I didn't even know what it was at the time. I've thought about it so much since, what that did to make me feel at home in my own place in a completely different way, and in my own self. And I think probably more than anything, that weekend with those guys changed everything in my whole life, really. And that's where I came across the 8 shields for the first time. And I guess they were the 6 shields at the time. It was an older version of your recording that you'd done, seen through native eyes. But I listened to that afterwards, and it's like, oh my God, there's like a lot of thought gone into arriving at this place in your life where you're a human being. And I'm connected to the world in a completely different way to all these other beings. And there's a way of developing that. And I never stopped. From then on, I quit my job and moved down and did a 3-month res program there by the next year. And after that, stuff happened. Lots of stuff happened.
Yes. And Abric O'Kelly as well, because I got to work with him a bunch over the years in Washington around the same time. So it's just wonderful, for Aidan and I to hear this, that we literally wanted this podcast to lift up and celebrate a bunch of people around the world who are growing this and touching thousands of children that I've never met, hundreds of thousands. I just feel so thankful for that, right? But it didn't occur to me until you shared that story. This was about people that were immersed in this training and then went off elsewhere and actually inspired more to happen. So I'm really thankful for Abric and Anna and Greg, because Greg is a bit like, he wanders around the world and then, stirs it up in different places. He's lit a lot of good fires, because I keep meeting people who know Greg from Europe all over the place.
Yeah, he taught me stuff about the Irish language, which I found really annoying, but because he started to learn Irish, and some of it was Scots Gaelic, but he was doing some Irish Gaelic as well. But he'd go off and hang out with loads of Irish speakers and, spend lots of time out there and do the same thing with them where he's asking loads of questions. So people are always going to invite him in the door because he cleans up after himself and helps make the dinner, and he asks loads of questions. It's a really good lesson.
Something that really hits me is seeing the people and the way that the people were, and how that inspired you to go, wait, these are people who are living the way that I want to live and are fully alive, I think was the word you used. And I'm really curious about that thread into the work that you're doing now, and how you're bringing it into your work now.
Sometimes I wonder, is it resonance? Like just being around the resonance of that, it gets in on you and suddenly you've got a little bit of it inside of you, and then you express it in your own way and it can grow. And the gift of what Abric was doing, which was really amazing and difficult, was he created lots of opportunities for someone like me to go back again and get more. And I think if I hadn't had enough dirt time with those guys, I would have gone away and I'd had a good weekend, but I wouldn't have had anywhere to put it. But maybe that's where the tape series really helped, because I realized that there's other people out there in the world also doing this. And just the timing was beautiful, because I came across Forest School through going to the UK to do the Art of Mentorings, which arose out of John's work and the 8 Shields work. And I met lots of people who were expressing this kind of resonance in their own unique way from all over Europe and the world at this event in the UK. And my tribe got bigger. It was still outside of Ireland, but it was starting to get bigger. And then by the next year, more Irish people came, and we started to grow in terms of who was having lots of time. And because the UK community were so good at creating a regional pulse and creating these sort of more connected experiences and taking the teachings and making them grow. So out of that, I was at one of those events and I was asked to come, would I host the first forest school leadership training that is a UK qualification in Ireland. So that was my opportunity to get on the phone and go to lots of people who'd never been involved in deep nature connection practices, but to open the door to people and say, look, you don't know this, but the bundle of teachings that everybody training you on this course has is deep nature connection and practices, but we're teaching you a qualification. So at all, like Anna Richardson is one of the people who came to Ireland to train, Marina Robb, who's wrote the book on forest school with John Cree, Mark there, and then Carol and Elizabeth. So, all of them had been to all the art of mentorings. So that's who came to Ireland to bring this work. And I think if it had been in different hands, it would be a very different kind of forest school community now. It came through people very rooted in and, deeply loving of nature.
That's really cool. I love, Ciara dropped the word back there that for the younger listener, she said the tapes. I was listening to the tapes. And I just want to let you know that means recorded audio. So today you'd be listening to an MP3, but back in those days, they were tapes, all right?
You rewound them.
And people used to play them, I heard, until they broke. And it was, as you pointed out, you said it was really well thought out. It was something that Yngve and I, who had started our work in 1983, based on a bunch of research I did, but it was also the way my grandmother had raised me as a boy, the way that Tom Brown mentored me from there. And then when I met Yngve, he had the same upbringing with the Bushmen as a young child, and then the Akamba as an older child, all the way until his adulthood. So there were so many common threads with all my research. And when Yngve looked at it, he said, you've assembled a map of everything that the Akamba did with me, everything the Bushmen did with me. And this is what they do with their own children. And this is what Tom Brown did with you. He said, but you've organized it according to Roman numerals. He said, how could you take something so sacred and put it under Roman numerals? Don't you realize, John, they're the ones who got us into this problem in the first place. And I actually, honestly didn't know what he was referring to. I honestly did not at that time. I was 23. Like, I had totally focused on hunter-gatherer nomadic cultures. I wasn't looking at Roman influence on the world. But as I gradually came to understand, that's why Yngve said we have to use the directions to organize this material, not the Roman numerals. And he even said, John, you have Irish ancestors. I have Irish ancestors. Even they organize things according to 8 times a year. They have these festivals and things like this. He said, and the Akamba use the directions and the Apaches, but we can't do it the way they did it. This has to be universal. We must do it universally. I said, well, how do we do that? He said, I'm not quite sure. Let's ask the children. And he was guided by this vision that this must be universal. It must not be cultural appropriation. It must reflect the honest eyes of innocent children looking at nature. And this became really important as, set of design principles ultimately. And, I know what you're doing. There's people out there who learned the 8 shields in an art of mentoring and they think this is the only way to do it, right? But really, design principles are simply principles. And if you take those 8 directions as a map, so to speak, and all of the things that are lined up on that map, with the art of mentoring principles and all the various things that are represented, seeing through native eyes, for instance, which today is called tracking our roots in nature. Again, because we don't want to offend anyone because they were upset that we use seeing through native eyes. So taking that, as Yngve said, we don't call it a curriculum because that implies that it's some kind of linear pathway with tests and things like that. He said, it has elements of curriculum, but it also has elements of being flexible and paying attention to nature and seeing what nature brings us. And he would say, we'll use that 50-50 principle where we can plan the time with the children. But if we go out wandering with them according to our plan and the deer should show up and do something really interesting, well, then the plan goes out the window because nature is gifting us, right? It was always about letting nature lead, so to speak. And letting nature lead within each individual, that culture of allowance, that spirit, which is, something I'm interested in hearing you reflect on, because I know as you take this, this mirror of 8 shields principles, which can be applied any way, anywhere, like you should see the Australians, what they did with it. It looks so different from what happened in North America. And that's exactly what we wanted. It's like, yes, regionalize this, make it about your place, make it about your culture. These are just reference points. These are just reference principles. And I know that landing this in Ireland, there's already things there, and there's things that must be respected and lifted up and honored. And I wonder, how that's working within Forest School Ireland and the work you're doing now.
Before we go there, it really reminds me of like what I was missing. It wasn't just that suddenly this light got switched on and I was really like fully connected. Like that wasn't my experience. I'd come from 1970s, 1980s Ireland, where we were violently, speaking it from the lens of a person living in Dublin, we were violently leaving our traditional roots behind in a way. It was all about modernization. The Irish government had been very protectionist. Catholic Church was extremely prevalent in the state. That hold was beginning to move away from us in the 80s and 90s, and it became about modernization and traveling outside of the country. And we started to be able to have an influx of new globalization was able to come in and bring new things, which was really fun, at the time, because it was extremely limited. And I would experience it as being quite oppressive, that there was very little choice. And for someone like me who's interested in culture and interested in, like, I feel Irish, but I also feel so connected to you, or so connected to people in the UK, or so connected to people in Germany, because I'm so excited by that. We've got these common human experiences. But I feel like we were moving away from the land a lot, and we were moving away from sort of some of the village style living that made us very healthy in a lot of ways. So when I realized, I suppose, the missing pieces were kind of what pulled me along this journey in a way. And I couldn't even probably name them. And I had an idea, but it was like, okay, there's something around, I don't have kind of elders, or maybe there's something around, I'm not like having this sort of celebration moment in the evening with my family, or maybe I haven't really held up children as like being really important or whatever. And like those things felt like a void. So your map also does that. And, and it's not to say that my experience in Ireland is the same for somebody who might have lived in a really connected way in the middle of a village somewhere, but they probably weren't, like, they would have known, but also like, I went to this amazing weekend with this amazing woman called Lucy O'Hagan. We did eel skin tanning from Lough Neagh, which is the biggest inland lake in Ireland. And it's going through this huge ecological issue at the moment. And we were tanning the hides of these eel skins and talking about the mythological figures of eel in Ireland in a stone circle in Connemara, And while we were there was a woman who was a sean-nós dancer. So sean-nós is the form of Irish dancing that's all about the beat. If there was a root of jazz anywhere in the Irish culture, it comes from this, like using the feet to accentuate and match the beat of the music. So you had to know the songs to dance, but it was more like you didn't have to, you could make up your own steps. It wasn't as formal. And she talked a lot about how the dance halls were all closed by the church in the 90s, 30s and 40s. And the people who went dancing and played music and interacted with each other, because it was how you met people, were named and shamed in church the next day. And women particularly observed and how they moved and talked. And they were literally called out in church and cursed from the pulpit, right? And she's written this amazing book called Sparks on the Flagstones for kids about, and it's all of the different festivals that we have in Ireland and her experience of culture. But there were these definite schisms where there had been a pointed way to cut the Irish off from their indigenous cultural living ways that kept the culture and people connected and alive and empowered. And that was done in lots of different ways. So I don't think I'm unique in being ashamed of something about this sort of really, really awful state that we got into post-famine, or because of colonization, how utterly wrecked we were, and that, we were shamed around the world as a result of being so wrecked. And when we got there, and like with just no access to good health or education or anything, and also traumatized. So, you've got this sort of, this shame of the people who had to leave and how they reacted to being in the world and how they were treated. So, in my life, there wasn't a value around being outside. As I found with this work, I had to confront that. And I was working a lot in the UK with folks over there and traveling around the place, and just really I hadn't really understood the human story of leaving the land in quite from my own context, and everybody else's has the same story too. So when we talk about, like, in Ireland, there are these 8, times of the year where there's like ceremony, there's fun, there's practical things, and the kids were part of it as much as the adults would hold it. It always involved making something from straw or hay, or you'd be sent out to get the rushes to make the Bridget dolls or the Bridgogs or the Bridget's crosses. Or, you might go, at Lunasa and go and make, different things out of hay and stuff like that. Or there's the mummers. There's all sorts of amazing things that happen throughout the year. But only now, I think in the last 15 years, there's been a different kind of approach to people are coming back to that now. There's a mummers rave that you can go to on the west coast of Ireland somewhere, where they make the straw heads and they go and they rave. It's a little bit of like, and what I love about it is we're reclaiming, but making it now and making it about who we are now, and imagining it in it, and permission to like reclaim it in a new way. That tradition is there for a very good reason, but also, is that relevant and helpful now?
Then this map of, the 8 shields and that pathway of seeing through native eyes or tracking our roots in nature, like, I think it's probably really quite a journey to figure out how those principles are reflected and how they can be uplifted in a way that's truly Irish.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think people really struggle with anything like that, where you give a signpost or there's a guide. Like, it's a really good guide. It's not like you're left on your own. You've done so much work to help get people there, but only through the living of it and being with it. And that means some of that will take a long time. And that's something that I'd like to reclaim for myself and just put it on the table, that, we're very quick to make very difficult, important decisions now. And that ability to take time to consider things before acting on them. I even see it in communities where there's a lot of, getting the ducks in a row and trying to sort things out, but actually there's still that fastness, and just sort of to slow things down and to be able to look at each shield or go through each thing and go, there is no right answer here. It's just, how am I going to live in good principles? How do I take this and it's relevant to my life? I can't live your life. I can't live somebody else's idea of what living the 8 shields is. All I can do is live. It has to come through me, through experience. And because you've highlighted something like, oh, where are the elders in my programs? I'm recognizing I don't have elders coming into my programs. I have trees, but it's helping me continue to grow in ways that I haven't been able to do yet. So I'm really glad to be talking to you again. And I'm really glad to honor my journey and the people who were so instrumental in helping me and actualizing me, and that I get to go back into that again at this stage, 13 years later, where, what is it going to be like this turn of the wheel?
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing that you'd mentioned before we started recording, which was that, that in the Irish wheel, it starts in the West, right? So that's already an obvious thing that has to be adjusted for. It's happening in the fall. Is that right?
Yeah, it starts at Samhain. So it starts at Halloween. It's at the dark phase, because we were born, we come through the dark and we were born out in spring, but it all starts in the darkness of the womb. So the new year is Samhain as well as Halloween.
That's interesting. And this just points out, the need to be flexible. There isn't one right way to do this. It really needs to work where you are.
We have a little bit of a limitation with our language anyway, because we have to say, oh, this is the first shield, or, we have to sort of start somewhere. But of course, the reality of it is that it's the endless wheel, right? It's these cycles that are moving through, and every one of them is naturally moving from what came before and moving into what comes afterward, right? So that flexibility is inherent in it, and it's only the limitations of our language, I think, that put us in that space. As you're speaking of this, I think the thing that really strikes me is, and Yngwie used to say this, right, that we need to learn to live fully in 2 worlds, right? Mm-hmm. That is sort of the task of our time, if you will, right? We've really had this great disconnecting from nature. And as you said, that's really a human story at this point, right? You beautifully shared sort of your own cultural history of how that was happening in Ireland as you're growing up. But we all have that same story, different versions of it that happened all over the world. But now you're describing the reconnecting, modern reconnecting. And I think what it makes me think about is this idea of how is taking people through forest school helping them to become better people, regardless of what they're going to do next, right? And what you're sort of seeing in terms of the human thriving that comes out of the forest school, because I know not everybody is going to decide to become a forest school teacher after they've gone to forest school. Some of them are going to be accountants, and we need wonderfully nature connected accountants like our dear friend Joe or Adam. That the world is actually going to benefit from that as well, right? And software engineers that are connected to nature, and all of the different roles that we play sort of in our modern human world, right? That we're actually trying to weave forward. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that and what you're seeing in terms of how your work is affecting that.
Yeah, like in a way, because we're so new, we started the UK training here in 2013. And then by this last year, we wrote the Irish version, and we have a forest school qualification from Ireland, and we're creating the dictionary of Irish folklore, which folklore means dictionary, but it's like all the terms we use at forest school, but in Irish. So there's a nice enclave of the folks who are really good at Irish getting together at all our gatherings to go, what do you call a bowsaw? And how do you say sit spot? What's eagle eye? You call it sparrowhawk? Yeah, because that makes more sense here. So, there's this lovely community of practice that's happening that's really exciting. I suppose the kids that I originally started working with are now going to college, and I don't get to see them very often, but starting to work with younger and younger children. So I might take a 4-year-old out into a park or into the woods, and it's dark and it's 6 o'clock at night and they have a head torch on, and I don't know what's going on in their brain that they have had this experience at 4 and 5 years of age in Ireland in December. They might do sports and stuff like that normally, but it's so epic what they're doing. There's a long walk. There's a fire where they're all playing in the dark, playing chasing in the woods, for using tools. So, I could wax lyrical about what that does to a person, but I think on some level, I watch them they're almost sort of a bit spacey when they're on their way back, and almost a bit emotional, and they hand them over to their parents going, they've had the most epic day in their life. That's all I can tell you. And they're just going to sleep a lot now after you feed them. And, as I'm teaching adults to become forest school leaders, as well as with the kids through my programs. And all I can say is it's so much more about community and about them unlayering the edges that school has put on them during the day, or unlearning some of the stuff that they've learned about themselves that tells them that they're not good at stuff. That they're kind of this sort of joy and aliveness permeates them, insofar as one little girl who comes to a city park, honestly, it's a city park in an area that's struggling quite a lot, and she won't go home back to the city, which is going back to school from this teeny tiny little bit of forest that we work in every morning. So I don't want to go back to the city. So I think they're just getting that little bit of wildness back. And if things had continued on, and forest school is just one of those things that's worked. I was doing nature connection and bushcraft with kids before forest school training came to Ireland. I will tell you something, I had to have a part-time job because that was not selling. People were not signing up for that, but they love forest school. So it just works, right? So, and I'm delighted that it does. And it's ubiquitous. Everybody knows about it now. I got on the phone and had to ring anybody I could find anything about. And there were some early years people who were ahead of the curve. They'd been to Denmark. They'd seen amazing stuff. So there's loads of research. There's lots to explain why it's working, but I've just witnessed that we're helping to create a movement of young people who will be the future leaders, who have had a chance to care and have had a chance to think this should be in school. Don't you think that wouldn't that be nice if every kid in Ireland once a week, at least a couple of times in their life, got to do this as part of their development, their human development. So I don't know where we're going. And I really the training is amazing. Carol, the woman I work with, is amazing. The support we get from Bridget's Garden in Galway, who provides the course, is amazing. The people we're meeting to teach it are amazing. And everybody walks into this going, oh, I'm just going to learn a load of activities. I'm going to write some essays and I'm going to be a forest school leader. And afterwards they're like going, like there's tears at the end of the training, kind of going, oh my God, it's epic. Like my whole life has changed. A lot of them go through that process. So if that's the shift that's happening for folks, just getting this qualification, and we are bringing in all the 8 Shields principles into that, which is overlaid by, there's Cornell's flow learning, and then the 8 Shields is huge, like really clear way to teach it. And then we overlay the Irish system on top, the Irish cycles on top of that. They get all of that and then they go and live it and practice it and learn as they go. I think the future is really bright. And also I think there's things that I would like to see growing more as well. That I'd love to bring more of this work with you, John, into the Irish awareness, in whatever way that we can.
Well, I started with my commitment to help the people of my ancestry. So I'm bound to now. I've said it live on Tracking Connections. So I'm in. I'm committed. How many children have been touched by this network of forest schools in Ireland, do you think?
Wow. If half the people we trained all worked with, say, 200 kids, which is only like 5 classes of kids or something, we're looking at thousands. That's so far. And it's a lot, probably more than that. It's growing throughout the country now as well. We've got some really great regional energy. People really work together. The community stayed really good and really well connected. So yeah, keeping more of that. And there's loads I'd love to talk to you about it, about really conscious community conduct, which isn't something that we can really go into during a training, right? Or grief tending, because you come across that quite a lot. People are often at a big transitional point in their career and they are coming to forest school training because they need to do things differently and they get this whole other bundle as part of it. So yeah, and I think that there's usually that is part of the whole process, that it's like, oh, there's something happened to get me to this point, and I'd like to see that, we're getting through that and that it's valued and it's not a stuck place. There's a lot of joy as well, and just even like placing elders more firmly in the work that we're doing. So
we got some plans, we got some designing to do, but
what's your plan?
That'll be our next episode. But the thing that I'll just reflect on is that there's sort of those basic layers of the 8 Shields principles, designing with natural cycles, which we're the masterclass that we've created is about that. And once a community gets going on this, then all these needs come up like you're talking about. How do we incorporate the elders? How do we support the grieving process? Because grieving, as one of our elder consultants said, is actually just an opportunity to activate leadership. Because even in your own story, it was that moment for you. It was that trough that you went into, but it led to all this, right? It's the opportunity to activate leadership. And I think that will be a future episode for us, for sure, Ciara. But this has just been amazing. And I've so loved this journey with you.
Yeah, me too. Gotta say, even though that trough happened at a particular point in time, I think I've been running towards it for quite a long time. So the fact that I fell into it is okay. And yeah, I'm just really glad that, it's like anything, isn't it? There's a gift hidden in most things, and there's so much hope, and there's also a lot going on. So I'm really grateful for everything that you're doing, and you've redesigned things to contemporize them, and I'm just really excited that this is stepping up and coming into my life again. And if that means that we can make things more available in Ireland for people to tune into, I think that's really going to be great for the people who want that. Like, it's so worth it, because I know I'm a human being now, and I think my job isn't separate to me. My friends are the kind of people that get, like, I've loads of different types of friends, but like my friend life, my work life, my home life, it's all fed by everything that I do out in nature because of the teachings that I've had and the experience that it's led me through. So we're all in it. Don't know if that makes sense, but I feel huge benefit in my life from the opportunity that I've gotten from being around this and you and all of the work that we've done. So
Well, great. I thank you so much, Ciara, and I think it gives Aidan and I a good excuse to come over and research some more ancient sites together as part of our, we're going to need some orientation in order to be helpful to you. So we'll make it a point.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I just want to reflect just the hopeful message that comes through what you're describing. And, to use that word epic, I think is really a beautiful word. And just this idea that, we are all going through this journey of healing and reconnecting, and that is part of it. The grieving and everything you're describing is part of it, but to be engaging with that full on in community and moving that forward, that makes me feel really, really hopeful for the future and for these next generations. Thanks.
I'd like to mention Maeve Gavin, actually, because she's passed now, but I was so inspired by her, and she was a huge part of the growth of the Nature Culture Network in the UK. But she always talked about being someone who was holding the door open and inviting people through. And she was, Maeve had Irish, Scottish, English. She had it all in her. And we hung out a lot in Ireland. And just in honor of her and her memory and her energy of that, I want to hold the door open and invite people into this work. And I can't do it, for people, or I can just help. If I can inspire somebody to come and give it a go, then, or get their kids outside, or to give them everything I can to help them start to experience this for themselves, then that's all I could ever live up to. I just want to thank Maeve.
Yeah, I'll second that. Maeve, lovely being she was, sad that she's left us so young. The last thing is how do we find Ciara Hincksman if we are curious?
Well, you can look at forestschoolireland.ie. That is my website, and I'm on Instagram as well. You can find some nice photos of kids in the mud on Instagram.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you so much, Ciara. Thank you, Aidan.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to Tracking Connections. You can find everything related to the podcast and our current offerings at trackingconnections.net. We'll see you next time.